Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cycle podcast. I'm grateful to have you here today. Today's guest is Ellen. She is from Wisconsin and she is going to tell us a little bit about her journey. Ellen, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. I hope I can help out all the people who are suffering out there.
We definitely appreciate you sharing your story and absolutely will help people out. I always like to start from just tell us a little bit about you, anything and everything non-endo related.
Okay, well, I live in Milwaukee. I'm single, just kind of doing the COVID lockdown still a little bit. I've been doing artwork since 4 years old, and I love my dogs, and I guess that's about it,
Are you
feeling great.
Are you being able to get outside in Milwaukee and walk around and do stuff during
Yeah,
the time?
yeah, definitely been able to get outside. So just
Good.
kind of like staying away from, indoor spaces or whatever. But now that the weather's nice, it took a while. When we were first on lockdown, it was pretty miserable weather still. So been
Yeah,
able to get out and
good.
enjoy. Yeah.
Good. And yeah, I mean, in Milwaukee, it gets pretty cold like Detroit. So it's nice to be able to
Right.
get
Very similar.
outside.
You
Very similar.
understand.
Oh, I get it. I get it. And I've been there, so I know. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you again for coming on. And, I always like to start from the top. Do you remember when you started your period? And when you did, was it painful initially?
I do. My mom was a nurse. And I actually I got the book, What's Happening to Me. I don't know if that's out anymore. It was a cartoon book.
I feel like I remember
So
that.
yeah, it's like, what's happening to me? It was
Yeah.
like about puberty for both men and women, or girls and boys, whatever. And nothing was happening to me. And I didn't get my period till almost 16 years old.
Wow.
And I think my mom even took me to the doctor, and was kind of like, is everything okay? She hasn't gotten her period yet. And I just remember my mom saying like, oh, you're lucky. I mean, because she had horrible periods. So she was like, you're really lucky. And I'm like, whatever. So I think I pretended that I had my period.
Right,
My
because
friends
all
were,
your friends were having.
right, around 12, 11, they had their periods and I didn't. So I think mine was like right before I turned 16.
Okay.
And it actually wasn't very painful. It probably was like the only time that I had normal cramps looking back. It was spotty, brown. It wasn't a full period. And that's kind of how my first year was just like mild cramps. My mom gave me some Tylenol,
And you were
a
fine.
regular, and by the time I got to be, I want to say like 17 and a half, 18, it became like a huge, huge issue with the pain.
So when
I'm
that,
trying to
when that first started, I mean, you don't have to remember the exact years and all that because I know it's a lot to remember.
like,
But
yeah, I'm 48, so if everyone wants to know. So it's like,
right,
it's been a long time.
um, we're so 17, like 17, 18. So the pain started getting worse. Were you missing events? Were you missing school? And did your mom say, I suffered from the same thing? This is normal. Like what were the first initial conversations when that started to happen?
Well, when my pain got bad, my mom totally sympathized. Just even growing up, she was pretty open about, anything nurse, anything health. And my memories of her is that she would like lay down towels on her side of the bed and be bleeding through. I just remember her back then with Kotex, they had like the little belt, and then straps that would snap in the pad contraption.
Yeah.
And I just remember, she didn't complain to me, but just like seeing it, I just
Yeah.
remember her periods being like just really horrible.
Yeah.
And talking to her in present day, she doesn't think she was in as much pain as I was anywhere near, but she had really heavy periods. So, she was sympathetic and, got me a heating pad. And I think Tylenol was more of the rage in the 80s than Advil. So I would take it. And she was pretty good about me staying home from school. It was more like I was self-conscious, like, would they know why I was staying home from school? Just,
Right.
being an adolescent, but I stayed home from school. I know that.
Right. So the
And
pain was so bad that there's no way you were going to school.
right. And the other symptom that I did not connect for quite a few years later was fatigue. Like severe fatigue, not the kind of fatigue where you got 2 hours of sleep, the kind of fatigue that you just brain fog. I guess the kind of fatigue you would have if you had a like really bad infection or a really bad virus where it's just your whole body is draining. So I'd say 7th, 8th grade, when I was starting puberty, my mom had me take the Epstein-Barr test to see if I had chronic fatigue syndrome. You know, my thyroid was tested in high school, iron levels tested, all normal, all normal. So I just remember like really fatigued, but definitely not putting those two things together.
For sure. For sure. You just thought you were tired or not getting enough sleep or something along those lines.
Growing, adolescence, sleep a lot, you
All
know.
of it, all of those things,
Hmm.
right? All of the above. Okay.
Hmm.
So after high school, what happens? So you stay home, you're taking your Tylenol, you're getting the heating pad, and does this just becomes a part of your life and you're used to it?
Yeah, my mom moved to California like right after I graduated from high school. So she made sure that I got in to see her gynecologist, who she had to shop for gynecologists her whole life and was treated poorly. So she just recommended this man, and he was the best gynecologist I ever had. Um, I remember she went with me the first time, and he was so cool. Like, I wish all gynecologists were like this. He had this big desk, and he actually did like a full physical. So he asked, like, what are you eating? What are the stresses in your life? You know, what are you exercising? How much do you sleep? What's your diet? All those things. And he would explain, he's like, okay, now and then he'd ask about the menstrual cycle, and then he would do the exam. So it's like, then you were in like one room with like him taking down all these notes, and the next room, you know, was the exam. And he's like, always make sure there's a female, you know, I'm a male. And he was really, really great. And I remember the first issue, I felt so comfortable. I was able to tell him that every time I laughed, I peed, which was true.
Yeah.
And so he like, you know, I was 18, and he's like, okay, well, do the Kegels, you know, explain that to me. So I
Right.
did, and it corrected the problem. Um, and then I think the next time I saw him, you know, like when I was 19, he could tell how much my period was interfering with my life. So he wanted to put me on birth control continuously. So I did, and he checked in on me. He called me at 2 weeks in, and he's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, horrible. I'm like, I'm crying all the time. I'm sleeping even more. And he's like, okay, that's it. You're pill intolerant. Get off of it.
After
You
two
can't.
weeks.
Yeah. He's like, you can't be on it. You're not going to adjust to the pill. So he was really, really knowledgeable. And unfortunately, I was getting ready to see him when I was 20, and he passed away suddenly out of a stroke.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he was just such a great man, and I was just so devastated because I actually like really liked him as a doctor.
Yeah.
Um,
And you trusted
but
him and he
and
cared.
trusted him, and I mean, my appointments were like an hour long. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't like how it is today where you're kind of in and out.
Now, Ellen, was your mom ever diagnosed with endometriosis?
Never.
Okay.
Um, she did, as she aged, um, the gynecologist would be like, oh, you have a really boggy uterus. They described it as a boggy uterus. So she's pretty sure that she definitely, with the heaviness of her bleeding, she
Probably had
definitely had,
adenomyosis.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Whether she had endometriosis, we don't know, but
Right.
she definitely probably had adenomyosis.
Okay.
So,
So now at 20, what are you doing? Because you're in pain, you're not on birth control. I'm assuming
mm-mm.
you're trying to find a new doctor.
Mm-hmm. So I went to see his partner,
Okay.
and his partner wasn't quite as thorough. And his partner's like, well, let's put you on a lower dose pill, the lowest dose pill possible. And this would have been like 91, 92. So I don't know what pill that was.
Sure.
And same thing. This one, I stuck it out 3 weeks, but it was just like exact same thing. And I remember I had to take it at the same time every day. It was that low of a dose.
Yes, I
And
remember those. I think I took one like that.
right, where it was like you had to take it exactly the
Yes.
same time. And
Yes.
so I stopped taking it, and within like 30 minutes of me not taking it, I had my period. Like it was that, low of a
Mm-hmm.
dose. So
Right.
he kind of looked through the doctor's notes, and he's like, yeah, you probably can't be on birth control. So I just kind of accepted it. And I'd call my mom a lot because we had a lot of the similar symptoms. So I'd use her a lot to say, like, is this normal? So I'm not quite sure. Like, I think the pain beyond just the cramp, just where my uterus is, the first new pains I felt was in between my legs, would get like, it would radiate down like to my
Mm-hmm.
knees.
Yeah.
So I'd call up my mom. Yes, I get that. That's part of, period pain. You have bad periods like I do. I'm like, okay. And then it was like the lower back pain before my period. And she's like, oh, I got that too. And she'd always give me suggestions.
For sure.
And the first gynecologist I was telling you about, he'd say, like, take sitz baths. He would say, he was from South
Yeah.
Africa. And so I learned about Epsom salts. So it's like I became like this like huge bath taker. And that really, really helped my pain in my 20s, like taking a long Epsom salt bath. That would give me like a good 3-4 hours of relief.
That's a
And
really
by
good,
that,
that's a good tip though for everybody who's
yeah,
listening or watching. I mean, I try to do one every Sunday for an hour, no matter how I'm feeling.
right.
But if I am in a really bad place, like a cute place, and I can get in there, I will take a bath with Epsom
Yeah,
salt.
I mean, and sometimes it's really difficult to get
Yeah,
into
to
that
get
when
there,
you so
right?
much pain.
Yeah,
And then once I get in there, I'm like, oh, why did I wait? But sometimes it's just like I'm crawling
yeah.
to get in there. But I mean, that was a great pain reliever for me. I believe I started Advil around the same time. So, I was like, I think both my doctor and my mom, it's like I took 3 Advil and then alternated it with the 2 Tylenol. And
Yep. And so you kind of just got by on that for, I'm
mhm.
guessing, several years. What happened next in your journey? So you kind
Well,
of get
what
through all
happened
this.
next, it's like, well, I live in Milwaukee and it's a beer drinking town. So I remember, I think it was like my friend's birthday party, and it was in a bar, and I wasn't a big drinker, but I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't miss this birthday party. I had my period, and I was like, okay, it's only half a block away. I can leave in like 15 minutes if I need to. So I went and I had a beer, and then I had another beer, and like my cramps and my pain was going away. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Alcohol thins my blood.
I
See?
know. I was like, oh my gosh. And like I remember going to the bathroom, my period had even stopped like temporarily. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God. I'm like, this is the best, like this is better than anything I've taken. So it's horrible, but it's true, and it should be talked about. So it's like in my 20s, I was going to school part-time as an art student, and I was a waitress. So it's like I was using alcohol as my pain medicine when I had to like be waitressing and standing up, and like there wasn't like no one looked at you weird if you had a couple drinks like while you were waitressing for some reason in Milwaukee.
No, I
So
feel
that's
like
kind of
that's, especially in your 20s, I feel like that's just part of the process, you know?
yeah.
Like,
So I mean that's what I did. I felt like crap the next day, but it's like it got me through working, or it got me through that evening. It gave me a break, and then I'd feel like 10 times worse.
yes, yes, I
So I
understand
did,
that.
so I did that for a while. And then I just realized it was making me sick. So like by the mid 20s, I just stopped.
Yeah.
I can't, I think I just dealt with it. Like what I like to tell people, is for me, it's like what was once unacceptable, like in terms of pain or symptoms or anything, became acceptable.
Yeah.
Um,
You started to live with it.
I just lowered the bar down, and you
Yeah.
don't even realize you're doing that.
Correct. Correct.
Um, if I went from how I felt at 18 to how I felt at, almost 45, I would have gone to a doctor and demanded like something's wrong, but it's just kind of like, for me, it was like this slow decline.
Yeah.
And I just kind of kept, like you said, adjusting.
Yeah. I think that that's really common in a lot of people who suffer from chronic illness and chronic pain, but especially endo. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we downplay it. Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I literally talked to my doctor the other day and I wasn't feeling great. And I was like, he's like, how are you? I'm like, I'm good. And then I'm like, no, tell him the truth, Melissa. You don't feel good. You know, it's just,
Yeah,
I don't know why I do it.
I
It's,
do that too.
yeah,
Like, everything's great.
I'm fine.
You know,
Everything's great. Yeah.
yeah. And I lived with like two other girls during
Yeah.
college, and I knew they weren't suffering like I was. You know, it's
Yeah.
like they're like, oh, it's my period. Let's throw in a tampon. I couldn't use a tampon.
Same.
It hurt. It made my cramps worse.
Worse. Yep. Exactly.
So much worse, you know, and I just look at them like, they're like, oh shoot, I have my period and I have this event to go to. And I'm like, I don't even relate.
You're like, wait,
Like,
you can go to an event?
I know
It's funny
you're
that you say
walking
that.
around
Yeah.
you're just, it was more like a pain, like, oh, I have my period.
Right. I just
That
want
means
to
I gotta
stay
put
home.
a tampon in my purse, you know, and I'm like, oh, if only.
I remember in high school, I couldn't use tampons either. And I thought it was just me. Like, again, I always just equated to there's something wrong with me. Well, there was clearly.
Right.
I had endo, but I didn't know. But I remember my friends were all going on a boat. And I was like, well, I can't go on a boat. I'm on my period. And they were like, well, just put a tampon. And then, you know, they have these tiny little tampons. I was like, what, this is what you do? Like, I
Yeah.
literally didn't even understand. I think
Yeah.
that's the first time I was like, really? Like, I thought everyone had it like I did, you know?
Right. Yeah, and when I would see the gynecologist, they're like, "Oh, you suffer from really severe cramps." So in my mind, the pain that I had was, let's say someone who doesn't have bad cramps is maybe like a 2 or a 3.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm like an 8, but it's the same pain. So
Yes.
I didn't realize, and I think it's important for people who suffer from endometriosis to, when they talk to their gynecologist, talk about the different types of pain they're having. Because
Yeah.
I would use, basically, I'm having bad cramps. And my second term was, I'm having bad pre-cramps. Well, I think pre-cramps for normal women might be 3 hours before their menstrual cycle starts.
Right.
You know, like if
Right.
they're you know, they're getting ready to menstruate and they
Yeah.
might have a twinge of a cramp for
Right.
like 12 to 2 hours before it starts. But that's the only terms I knew, was like pre-cramps and cramps and back pain and leg pain.
Yeah, Alan, I think you bring up such a good point because I, same, would just be like, I have cramps. I never said I'm writhing back and forth on the couch, almost vomiting,
Mhm.
crawling to the toilet. I never,
Mhm.
ever said that to my doctor, ever. And that doesn't make it my fault because I definitely was saying I have really bad cramps, but I thought it was normal. That's
Right. I
why
do
I never
too.
said it.
And so it's kind of like, you know, in our society it's like menstrual pain is cramps. That's the word
Yes.
for it.
Yes.
And so,
So your point is very good for, again, sorry to interrupt you, but for the
oh
people who
no,
are
don't, yeah.
yeah, for the people who are listening, go in there and say, I'm writhing back and forth. I'm crawling to the toilet. Like,
Right. I'm having sharp pain here. I'm having
yeah,
like a dull pain here. I'm feeling pressure here. I've found that I feel like the only gynecologist I saw, and besides my excision specialist, was like more like what type of pain it is. But I think, unfortunately, with gynecologists, we have to be the one who says there's a pain here. This
yeah,
is how it is. You know, like, have like a paper in front of you and just
yes,
say like, this is how I feel
right.
throughout the month, and this is the type of pain, and describe it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Okay, good. Well, I don't want to go too far off of your story. I kind of went on a tangent there. Sorry about that.
No, but it's a good point,
It
you
is.
know?
And I'm really happy that you said that because I don't think I've talked about that on the podcast before because I would just walk in and say I have cramps. I also
Yeah, me
think
too.
though, like for us in the 80s and 90s, like
Mm-hmm.
this was way more taboo. And my gynecologist was a woman, and you know, I felt, maybe it was just me, but I felt it was taboo. I would be like, I have cramps. You know, I wasn't,
Me too.
yeah, I wasn't willing to really speak out. I do think in time it has gotten better where this is a lot less taboo, but I still think that we downplay how badly we feel.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so in your
So,
20s, you go through all of this, you're doing all.
right. So in my mid 20s, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, was planning on going to graduate school there. Um, I just wasn't able to, I just was feeling really bad. So my mom living in California was like, come out here. And my fatigue was getting really bad. I mean,
And this is fatigue every day. This isn't just around your cycle.
well, I think back then it was around my cycle. I'd say 2 weeks out of the month. So like the week before and the week during.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's like, well, why don't you come here? So I moved to Northern California, and I think I saw a gynecologist there, and then like they were explaining to me like, well, your progesterone gets really high before, like the gynecologist always had an explanation that made sense,
Right.
but it was never endometriosis. And they're like, well, your progesterone levels get really high, and then once you have your period, then it gets low, and then that's why you're tired. And
Hormones.
at
So
that
basically, they were just like, oh, it's your hormones.
right.
Yeah.
And then I probably mid 20s, I started getting like severe diarrhea, like a couple days before my period. So I was one of the people who was never diagnosed with IBS because I knew that it was completely correlating with my period. Like it was just so obvious to me. And my mom's like, I had that too.
Poor mom.
so it's like it's like then I started like, it's like, okay, Imodium. And the other thing was, it's like my periods were clotty. They still started out like really light the first day. And I actually felt best the first day. And then I knew within 24 hours, I was just going to be like a zombie, flu, body aches. Um, and the symptoms got worse as I aged, but it's just like, I was like prepared. It's like, okay, I'll take Imodium, and then I'll take something for my constipation, and then I'll use ice packs. And it was just like, I'm
Yeah.
juggling all this stuff. And
You came up with your kind of like method of dealing with it.
right. And I knew, luckily I was like 28 days. Once in a while I'd get mad because it would shift to 29 days. And then I'd like my schedule of like, before 28 days, it's like, okay, every Thursday, once a month, this is, then you can plan accordingly.
Yeah.
Because I just had every excuse in the book to get out of everything. So
Of course.
when I was in California, they explained, I think that's when they brought up chelated like magnesium or something. Take magnesium for the cramps. The diarrhea was explained that it's prostaglandins, and prostaglandins, I still have no idea what they are, but there's some sort of hormone that we have that signals the uterus when to bleed and get rid of the lining. And they're like, and that can go over to your colon, and that's why you're having the diarrhea. So it's like, I don't think I looked it up until later because the internet wasn't quite up yet. But it's true, like it says, like, can have diarrhea because of the prostaglandin. So I was like, okay, that's why I'm having diarrhea. It's just,
You
I
just
was
accept
piecing
it.
all this stuff together and
Yeah.
just trying to get along. I'm looking at my notes here.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Yeah. What's the next, like, kind of, you're dealing with all this. What's the next major thing where you're like, okay, something is wrong?
okay, so besides my symptoms getting worse, my mom like was a psych nurse, so she's like, why don't you go through therapy and see if you can find some coping mechanisms, because she could see that this was really interfering with my life. I was
Sure.
hiding it. I
Yeah.
thought, well, but not from my mom.
Right.
And so the therapy was really good. I started, it was nice. It was Northern California. I would meditate. I would do
Awesome.
yoga. So
Yeah.
that was awesome. And I
Yeah.
still do that stuff now. So that was great. But she also I think it was a psychiatrist. She also diagnosed me with PMDD, which
Mm-hmm.
I think is premenstrual dysphoric dysfunction or something,
Pre,
or
wait, PPMD, right? Isn't that it?
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know the exact what it
yeah,
stands
but
for.
it's a little bit like step up from PMS.
PMS, yes.
So, because what was happening to me was I was having like panic attacks before my period. So she's like, well, let's put you on an antidepressant for 2 weeks before your period. And that is a treatment if you have that,
Right,
but I don't think I did. I
right.
think I was having panic attacks because the stress of
The pain.
the pain,
Mm-hmm.
the body aches, the
Mm-hmm.
fatigue,
Yeah.
knowing that like if I wanted to function in the world, I would basically have to feel like I had the flu and was dying
Yeah.
once a month.
Yeah.
Um, I remember during that time just kind of like disconnecting from everything. It's like I was living with my mom. So I had someone there for me. The boyfriends that I had in the past, I was just kind of like, I don't want to date. Who the heck would want to date me with having bad periods? Because I didn't know I had a
Yeah.
disease.
Yeah.
Um, I got into like a dark space. I
Yeah.
would, I thought about like, I want to get married, I want to have children. And I was like, how can I have children if I
Yeah.
can't even handle a period?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
You were,
and
you
that
were
was
kind of at
like,
like this breaking point of like, how long am I supposed to live with this? Right.
right. And no answers in sight. And then it was like, I would go to the bookstore and get books. It's like how to handle, and they didn't mention endometriosis.
Of course not.
It's like diets for period pain. So it's like
Yeah.
I took vitamin E, vitamin D this
Mhm.
time at this
Yeah.
point, like they had like a regimen, and I had like like a box full of what do you call it? Just every kind of supplement,
Vitamin,
Chinese
yeah.
herb, everything. Um,
So at this point in your gut, though, you probably knew something was wrong. It's just, what are you supposed to do? Because you had no
right.
answers, right?
Right. And my mom was really sympathetic. She's like, "Oh, I never went through that much pain. I had the only difference was she didn't go through as much pain and fatigue as I did. I
She had
didn't
the heavy
have I had
periods.
I had short periods, and not I'd go through a few periods that were heavy, but nothing where I had to change my pad constantly.
Sure, sure.
So every time I went to a doctor, again, thyroid check, iron level check, fasting blood sugar check, Epstein-Barr check, chronic fatigue syndrome check,
Right,
clear, clear, clear. Your periods are perfectly normal. They're 28 days, fine. You don't have heavy bleeding. No issue there. They don't last long.
right,
Looks like you just have really bad periods,
right.
and then you get maybe you have a low pain tolerance.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I come back with them, and when I had fillings done, they didn't have, I think when you had lidocaine or novocaine, it has epinephrine in it. My body reacts really bad to epinephrine, and my heartbeat would go shooting. So I just had my cavities done without anything.
That's crazy that you say that because I have that same reaction. Like my heart races and
I
I
can't have it.
shake. I shake because
Me
I'm
too.
freezing.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you say that too, because a lot of people that I talk to that have endo, including myself, are very sensitive to medications, like
Mm-hmm.
heavy medications. Like we're very
Yeah,
sensitive. I know I personally am. I've talked to some other people that are
I
personally.
am.
Yeah, I don't know if it's
Or I have the opposite reaction to a medication.
sure.
Something that's supposed to make you drowsy, I'm like wide awake.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, so on your endo journey, you're in this dark place. You start talking to a therapist. What's next? What happened next?
I think I just accepted it again. I'm trying to
Are
look.
you in your later 20s at this point?
No, this time I'm around 30.
30? Okay. And you're still in
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
When do you
So,
find a doctor or find someone that starts to give you some answers?
oh gosh, not until I was 44,
Right.
close to 45.
So 14 more years before you find.
Yeah.
So what happens
Yeah.
kind of in this 14 years?
I just dealt with it. I moved back to Milwaukee. And my friends were here. The cost of living was here. My boyfriend moved back and with me here. And so I just built my life around it. I got jobs where I could take a few days off, or I'd lie and say like, okay, I have a second job, which I didn't have.
Sure.
My second job is my period.
It comes every 28 days. I just need a few days
Yeah, and I was
off.
just kind of like, like once a month I
Yeah,
do
you
this.
you adjusted your life around it. Did
Mhm.
anything else major happen in those? Like, did you ever have like where you had to go to the ER because of the pain or anything like that, or any other symptoms that started to be added on that maybe at that point you didn't realize
Yeah.
related to
I
endo?
hadn't gotten to I probably should have gone to the ER. I hadn't gotten to the ER point, but the things that I started adjusting. So in the 30s, a lot of my friends started having babies.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw the maternity jeans, because I had huge endo
And
belly. If you
yeah,
don't know that, like distension of like the
yes.
thing, I was like, oh my
I need a pair of
gosh,
those. I know.
and I did. Because it's like, before it was like during the summer, like they're like, wow, you really love your dresses. And I'm like, well, you don't know why I love my dresses,
Yeah.
because they're the best.
Hmm.
And so it's like, I remember going into Target pre-period with big bloat and like being like, oh my God, I can wear jeans and dress pants to work and like be comfortable.
And no one will know. Yeah.
So that's how low I was going.
Right. To the point of like, I'm just gonna adjust my clothing before my period. Yeah.
Hmm. And I think so, I'll fast forward to so in my 30s, I think I just retreated, just decided I couldn't handle children. I wanted children, but I just was like, and I didn't admit this to myself until like my 40s, but I was just like, I can't, how can I get pregnant? How can I do this? I can barely function during my period. And I was, and my fatigue was becoming like 3 weeks out of the month,
Yeah.
till eventually towards the end, it was like maybe 3 days I'd be awake,
Yeah.
where
And
I
were you still having the bowel issues as well?
mhm.
Were they
But
increasing or were they always still just right by your period?
um, the diarrhea was just right by my period, but the constipation was getting worse. I didn't really suffer too much constipation, so it was getting worse. And so in my 30s, I don't really even think I saw a doctor. By that time I started my own business of selling artwork and boutique and whatever, and I was like, this is perfect. I
Because
can
you
take
can
off when I
control,
want
right,
to.
control your own hours.
I would sleep in the closet.
Oh,
There's a closet underneath the stairs, but I
yeah.
would get, so when I knew it was kind of dead, I had like, a little doorbell thing. So I knew when people were coming in, I would just like lay down a blanket and a pillow and I would be asleep in like 30 seconds. So fatigue was I just sometimes feel like fatigue isn't talked enough about.
I agree
It's,
with
it's,
you.
it's just so debilitating.
Yeah.
I was just like, and then it was to the point where when I walked, it felt like I was walking through sand. Like my whole body joints would ache.
Yep.
Um, then I started getting in my 30s like the sweat hot flashes. I'd wake up just completely drenched, and so every time I'd probably go to different gynecologists. I had a clinics with my healthcare system from owning my own business, so it was like before, when I complained about in my period when I was younger, it's like, oh, well, your period just started, it gets bad, it'll regulate. So then when I was in my 30s, it's like, well, you haven't had any children. So your period is difficult because now you're 38 and you haven't had any kids yet.
Hmm.
No one told me to get pregnant, but that was the
That's good.
explanation.
That's good.
Then in my 40s, it was like, oh, you're perimenopause.
Menopausal. Hmm.
That's why you have all these symptoms. So it was just like, I just gave up. I just gave up
Yeah.
in my 30s.
Yeah.
So kind of like what got me to, this is where I have to look at my notes. Kind of what got me to where I ended up is I was visiting my mom in February. I got my period, of course, and my aunt and uncle and cousins were going to take the ferry down to San Francisco, and I did not want to miss out on it. And I was talking to my mom and like, how am I going to get through this? I'm like, my period. And she's like, just do it. She's like, your aunt, not but aunt by aunt that married into, but she had really bad periods. So I knew I could like kind of like, she's like, Ellen, come with us. If you need to sit somewhere, you can. So she was really understanding. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I get to San Francisco and we're walking around, and all of a sudden, like, just something doesn't feel right. I feel faint. I'm sweating. I feel like I'm gonna pass out. I had my cramps, but it wasn't the cramps that was doing that, because that wasn't my MO.
Right.
By the time I got home, I had this pain on the right lower side of my abdomen, and I literally was walking hunched over.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I think it felt like a gas pain. It felt like a digestive issue pain.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, it's the soup. I made you bean soup last night. And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, that's what it is. Like, and then like by the next day it was still there. I'm like, it's not moving. Like,
yeah.
and so long story short, she's like, I was about to fly back home, and she's like, you've got to go to the ER. And I'm like, my insurance, I'm out of state. Like, I don't know. And she's like, no, you've got to go to the ER. I'm taking you to the ER. So that was my first ER adventure. And so I'm having a really bad period, and I have like this gas pain. And so blood work, like right away, they put me on, I think that was the first time I had IV pain medicine. So like they put me on Dilaudid, and I'm like, whoa, everything's great.
Yeah.
And like they took me down for a CT scan, and while I was waiting for that, the nurse came in. She's like, can I get you anything else? I'm like, what did you give me? And she said what she gave me. I'm like, I still have cramps. And she like, just as she not nodding her head like, of course you do, not being told like you should take Pamprin or Midol or whatever. She
Right.
really honestly was like, had that look of like just knowing
Yeah.
that like
Yeah.
I was
So,
really suffering, like
yeah.
without even saying anything.
Well, if they give you Dilaudid and you still have cramps, that means that you're in some significant pain.
Oh yeah, like I was like, I still have my cramps. The pain on the side was gone, but I still had my cramps. I still
Yeah.
had my back pain. I still had all of that. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was kind of mad. So it turned out that they said that I had a possible hemorrhage. I had a hemorrhagic cyst.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, don't fly for the next like 10 days. It ruptured a little bit. You have some blood. And so I didn't. They gave me some pain medicine, and I'm like, yes, this will help my cramps. Like that was like my main
Your
focus.
first focus.
Like, yes, and I took it, and it helped like certain pains, and it didn't help other pains,
Yeah.
so I was like, oh, that's kind of,
But at that point,
I,
still, no one said the word endometriosis to you. They just said,
no,
you've got
no,
this
what they said,
cyst.
they're like, you have a cyst, there could be many causes. We don't think it's like, it's not, they're more concerned about
The
ovarian
torsion.
torsion.
Yeah.
It's an ER. So they're just like, in 3 months, check up with your gynecologist and get another ultrasound or CT scan.
Right.
So I did that. I hadn't been, so I called, and of course, gynecologists are really hard to get into, especially if you haven't like had one for a while. So I
Yeah.
went into a clinic, and they're like, all we can do is get you a midwife. And I'm like, okay. So I went in, I had like my CD or like DVD, and I had all my, stuff
Yep.
out. And she looks, and she's like, well, you probably just had a simple cyst, and it probably was just bloody, but it's fine. And I'm like, well, they said I need to be checked out. She's like, no. She's like, are you in pain now? I'm like, no, not really. And, meaning the cyst pain. And I told her about my pain. She's like, wow, it sounds like you have really bad periods. I'm like, Yeah. And I'm like, well, shouldn't this be checked out? She's like, no, women get cysts all the time. You're in your 40s, it's probably going to happen again. So that was it. So again, I just like,
Okay. You were like, okay.
okay,
Right. What
that's
can you
all I can
do?
do.
Yeah.
And then I think maybe 6 months later, I got into a gynecologist. I was like, okay, she's a midwife. I'll get into a gynecologist. So I go, it was a recommended gynecologist. So I go in, again, paperwork, CD. Oh, we don't use this platform. We can't read it. Kind of scanned through the papers and was like, I'm sure the cyst has disappeared. If you haven't, has been reabsorbed, you're not in any pain. And all he did was like an exam, and he felt around like where the pain was. And he's like, I don't feel a cyst. And I was like, well, I need to talk to you about something else. I said, I suffer from a lot of pain and a lot of fatigue. And I said, I'm talking like 3 weeks out of the month now. And he said to me, I don't deal with pain. He
Oh
literally,
my
he
gosh.
literally said to me, I don't deal with pain. And I looked at him and I said, you were recommended to me by someone who had triplets. So you don't
Mhm.
deal with pain when women are giving birth? I was like, I had it. He's like, oh, I deal with that pain because that's to be expected, but I
Oh.
don't deal with menstrual pain. It's just too complex.
Were you like, close your book, walk out of
I
there,
literally was like,
bye?
and the thing, okay, so the funny part was my mom was in town when this happened because, sorry, I feel like I'm rambling. I apologize.
Oh, you're fine.
So my mom was in town because 2 weeks before that, so for about 15 years, I started having heartburn. And it would happen at like 11, between 11 and 1 o'clock at night. And it never happened when I ate food. But this one time it was bad, like in my 30s is when it started. I called the nurse and I'm like, I'm coughing now. And like, it's so bad. I'm like doubled over. I'm like, but I can't go. And I'm the one who said I had heartburn. And I'm like, oh, my dog's once again into the room. Sorry about that. And she's like, no, you need to go to the ER if you're having heartburn that bad. She's like, that's serious. I'm like, oh, I feel so stupid going in for heartburn. She's like, no, go in. So it took me like 2 hours to decide to go in. By that time, I was doubled over. So they gave me the heartburn remedy, which I think is just lidocaine that you ingest and like an antacid. And by the time I got in there, it was like 2 hours after it started. And I was like, yeah, I feel better. So I stayed on Protonix, which is like a like a heartburn remedy that's like a step above, like over the counter.
Sure.
So I would get these bouts. So two weeks before I had my appointment with it, I had like an attack that was just so bad. I called my friend and I'm like, you've got to take me. It was like right in my stomach. And I was like, oh my God, like, do I have an ulcer from all these NSAIDs? Like,
Sure.
holy crap.
Sure.
And I was doubled over, and it turned out it was my gallbladder. And they're like, you have so many stones. They're like, how did you not come in sooner? I'm like, I thought it was heartburn. And they literally like, you thought it was heartburn?
You were like, well, I have a high pain totolerance because of my
Right. And
period.
then again, of course I had my period again when I went in. And that's the other thing I noticed. When I would get my periods, it's like, let's say I had a toothache. The toothache would get worse. Let's say I had a sore throat. The sore
Because
throat
the
would get worse.
inflammation, so
Any type of,
inflamed.
yeah, anything that didn't have to do with endometriosis would get amplified.
Yeah.
So I like, then it was like I went to the ER, like great treatment, like, IV here, checking vitals here. Then like the doctor comes in, he's like, oh my God, you need this out within a week. This is like so huge and you have so many stones. They're like, we can't believe you went this long. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, I live alone. And
Yeah.
so I met with the surgeon and he's like, wait you can wait 2 weeks. He gave me pain medicine. I'm like, yes, my cramps. Like I wasn't in constant pain with my gallbladder.
Right.
I was like, yes, my cramps, because it did help a little bit more.
Yeah.
Oh, and before that, I had broken my hand walking my dogs. Like another dog was attacking my dog, and I pulled the leash, broke my hand in 4 places. Didn't realize I broke my hand. Like my neighbor watched it, got the other dog alone, and he's like, just ice your hand. So I iced my hand for a couple hours, and then I realized I couldn't move it.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, oh, maybe I strained it. So I went in, and they're like, you broke your hand in 4 places. No clue.
Oh
No
my
clue.
gosh. Oh, it's because your pain tolerance is so high.
Yeah, because what I did was I figured I have bad cramps. And so anything that feels less than the pain I was in,
Yeah.
and see, here I am still using the word cramps. I should say I had bad visceral pain, bad somatic pain, bad aching pain. You know, that it's like, if it was less than that,
Right.
if it's less than what my period is, it can't be that serious, because a period is normal and women have pain, and I have a bad period. I know that.
Right.
But it can't be anything serious.
Right.
Than this pain I'm in.
Oh my.
So this was like the beginning of my adventure. So I broke my hand on the gallbladder, and then my mom flew in and helped me with the surgery, and I was terrified of surgery. I was just terrified of being put under. So I had the surgery, and I woke up really quick from the anesthesia. Like, they were like, oh my God, you woke up super quick. I'm like, oh, I'm not surprised. And like, they showed me a picture of all the stones that was in my gallbladder.
Yeah.
And I was so high from anesthesia. I'm like, oh, that's nothing. Look how pretty they are. But then I looked at it later. I'm like, oh my God, I had like 80 stones in there. They almost had to open me up. Like, they did laparoscopic, but he's like, we didn't know if we could get your gallbladder out through that hole, because it was so huge.
Goodness. Wow. Wow. I wonder if that's from the years of taking Advil.
Could be.
I don't know.
And there's, I think a lot of my, I have a lot of gallstone issues on my side of the family, which I didn't know.
Yeah. I have no idea why people get those. I don't either. Not a trained medical professional. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So break your hand, gallstones, have surgery. You see this terrible doctor. Now what happens?
So because of the gas pain, and he put so much gas in that I actually was like over my ribs. It's like you could pop the gas, like bubble wrap. And so he was like, okay, every 15 minutes walk, 5 minutes gently. And he was a really good doctor, the one who removed my gallbladder. And so I used to walk all the time in California, and I stopped.
Yeah.
And so I started walking. And I started feeling really good. And I also, during this time, I should say in my 30s, I didn't stop doing everything. Like I read wheat belly. So I'm like, maybe I'm just having blood sugar issues. So I cut out wheat, I cut out sugar. I changed my diet, just water. I didn't give up coffee, but I started doing cutting things out of my diet.
Did you feel better when you did that?
I felt a little bit less fatigued. And my pain did improve a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it would have helped had I started that earlier, because I think my disease was so advanced.
It's like, Mom, let me in.
I know. He's a little 4.5-pound Chihuahua.
Oh.
So I did start doing that, and then I started walking. And I remember I would go on these walks, I'd feel great, but then I'd crash and fall asleep for 6 hours. And I'm like, well, maybe that's just at the beginning of exercising. Maybe everyone gets really tired. Here I am just making it,
I know.
these imaginary things.
I get it.
So it's so then I'd walk twice a day for a half hour, and I was getting up to 4 miles a day, 2 miles in the mornings, sleep, 2 miles in the evening, sleep. And so then what happened was, where my cyst that supposedly disappeared, I'd actually forgotten about it. I started having severe pain when walking. And I was like, oh my God, I can't, the cyst has to be there.
Yeah.
So I called around for all gynecologists. I'm like, I can't go to this clinic anymore. I've got to find someone who could see me like as soon as possible. So I probably called like 25.
Sure.
They're usually booked like, what, 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So I got in to see this woman. She was really nice. Again, brought my CD, DVD, my paperwork from like
All your
2 years,
stuff.
almost like a year and a half ago from the cyst. And she's like, okay, so she did do an ultrasound, I think. And she's like, yes, she's like, you still have that hemorrhagic cyst. We'll just keep an eye on it. So I explained to her about my pain, and she listened, and she's like, sounds like you have a bad period. She's like, how about we try an IUD? And I was like, don't IUDs have progesterone in them? Like I said, I'm pill intolerant. She's like, no, it'll just be localized. And I was like, no, I'm not going to chance it. I just felt in my gut.
Been through too much. Yeah.
So a couple of weeks went by, and I'm walking in it's just, the first thing she said, she's like, I don't know why that cyst would be causing you a pain down your leg and while you're walking. Like she almost didn't believe me. So I called her again, and I said, look, it's like 6 centimeters. I started doing some research on cysts.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm afraid it might be cancerous, because by this time I'm like 44.
And
I'm like, I'd really just like you to take it away.
yeah.
And she was really like, so that should have been a warning signal to me. But I was just one who didn't like to Google things, didn't like to Google medical things, because then you think you have everything. So,
well, yeah.
I mean, I wish I would have, but I didn't. So, set the surgery. My mom came to help me again. And so that was 3 months after my gallbladder surgery. So, she's like, you could lose your ovaries. So what I was really worried about was like losing my regularity.
Yeah.
To plan my life around.
Right.
Not the loss of the ovary.
Right.
The loss of, oh my God, this might make me irregular.
What, how old are you at this point? 44?
Yeah, 44,
okay.
Going on 45.
Right. So
closer to 45.
44, right. And you're just getting your first like laparoscopic surgery for an ovarian cyst.
Yes.
Okay.
So went in for it, woke up really quickly, and something was wrong. Like, so I'm really glad I had the gallbladder surgery, because it's like, it was tender, whatever, but it wasn't any, within a couple weeks I felt better.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything horrible. I woke up and I was like, oh my God, something's wrong. I'm like, Mom, get the nurse in here. I need something. Like, something is wrong. And so they gave me pain medicine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was sweating, like something was just so wrong. So finally the doctor came in, and she's like, we had to remove your ovary and your tube. It was an endometrioma. So that was the first time I heard that term. And I was like, when you hear OMA, I was like, is that cancer? She's
right.
like, no, the good news is it's not cancer, and we've gotten it all out. I burned off some powder burn. I'm like, powder burn? She's like, endo that I found, and you should be good to go. And I'm like, I feel really bad. I'm like, I just had surgery 3 months ago, and something is wrong. Like, that's when I was like panicking. So, it was a day surgery. So went home with my mom, and then my period was due the next day. And my mom's like, you won't get it because of surgery. Got my period the next day, most horrendous period I had. And I was like, Mom, you got to take me back. Call her. Like, I literally thought I was going to die.
Yeah.
Like, I stayed by my mom that night. I didn't even sleep. I was just like certain I was just going to die. That's how bad I felt.
Yeah, I understand.
So she drove me to the hospital, and I go up and see the gynecologist, and she's like, it's surgery. Of course you're gonna be in pain. She's like, what do you want? More pain medicine? And I'm like, is there a different type of pain medicine you could give me? I'm like, I just feel horrible. I'm like, I had surgery before. I'm like, I didn't do this with my other surgery. And I was crying, and she's like, my mom spoke up for me, and she's like, fine, I'll give you, I don't know what is one step up from hydrocodone or Norco, but she gave me like something that's a little bit stronger. She's like, I really don't want to give these to you, but I will. Like, just completely dismissing me, just really making me feel like I was drug seeking.
Yeah.
You know, and my mom is a psych nurse, was like, oh, she totally thought you were drug seeking.
Yeah.
You know. And I just went home, and I just was like so low.
Yeah.
So I'd say like it took me a week to like even just kind of function after that surgery. So then right after that, oh, the other thing was I don't know how long I think it was like a week that I had my follow-up appointment with her. She's like, how are you feeling? I'm like shit. Excuse my language. I'm like, I feel horrible. And she's like, well, I'm not giving you any pain medicine. That was literally her next words. Like she was more like focused on like, I'm like, I said, when did I ask for pain medicine? I'm like, I feel so horrible. And what happened during that one? She's like, well, that's when she went over. And I said, well, I looked up endometrioma, and that means I have endometriosis. You didn't tell me this.
Yeah.
She's like, we looked around. There's some powder burns. Endometriosis looks black, and you had some speckles of it. And I lasered those off. So you're good to go. And I'm like, okay, but something's really wrong. And in the meantime, I had gotten a really, really, really good primary doctor. And that's another thing I want to suggest to women is get a primary doctor. I got him before my gallbladder surgery. Get a primary doctor who like can really advocate for you.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have a spouse or someone with you to advocate for you. Because he basically saved my life, my primary doctor. So I went to see him because she was just like,
right,
you're fine.
Go
whatever.
away. You're cured.
Yeah. And so I went to see my doctor, and he like was like, oh my God, your blood pressure is through the roof. Like he could tell I was in extreme pain, and he's palpitating. And I'm like, and when he palpitated on my left side, I'm like, oh my God, I have another cyst. And I saw the big endometrioma, and I saw my regular ovary, and it was taken from like a distance, like so far away. Oh, and she did a DNC, even though I didn't have heavy bleeding, and she removed some cervical polyps, which I had like 20 photos of my cervical polyps up close, but like there was no after picture of like what it was just, you know. Unfortunately, that's what happens with regular gynecologists. So he like called like the gynecologist in his office, and he like ordered a CT scan for me to see if I had another cyst. And so 2 weeks after my surgery, I had another cyst on my left ovary. And this was like 10 centimeters.
It had to have been there during your surgery.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. It wasn't an endometrioma, but it was like a complex cyst. So I go to him, I'm like, you email these or you send these results. I'm like, I give you permission to like this gynecologist. And she calls me up, and she's all defensive. She's like, you saw the pictures. It wasn't there, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like,
a 10 centimeter cyst cannot grow in 2 weeks. I don't think. Medical professional, please prove me wrong. I just don't think that that's possible.
Right. So I was just so glad to have this doctor who believed me. And when he saw the pain I was in, he's like, do you need pain medicine? I'm like, my mouth just like dropped. Like, he's like, if I had a 10 centimeter cyst on my ovary, he's like, which would be my testicle. He's like, I sure as heck would want something for the pain.
Yeah.
He's like, that's ridiculous. And he became my advocate. Like he became like
so great to find someone like that.
Right. So he gave me some pain medicine to get me through. And so in the meantime, when I found out I had endometriosis. For some reason, it's like I went on the web. I didn't see much of information. It was just like the Mayo Clinic, like, da, 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 you know, do this.
Yeah.
Oh, she also said I had microscopic endometriosis and then I should have Lupron. Well, luckily, because of my issues with hormones, I was like, I'm not taking any hormones, no IUD, no Lupron, bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah.
So luckily I didn't like, so I'm looking and I found Nancy's note. Somehow, I don't know why I went on Facebook, but I saw it and I started reading her files, which, like she says, is a library. So then I'm reading about endometriomas, and I'm reading about how endometriomas are indicative, if you have pain, that you probably have bowel or like deeply infiltrating endometriosis, which we call die. And that's how you feel. You want to die. So totally spent my whole time. During this time between that surgery and my excision surgery, I couldn't work. I was like, I don't know what happened during that surgery, but like I was in pain 24/7. I was housebound.
Yeah.
And it was like such a dark time. I remember I went to take a bath and like it didn't do anything. And I just started
that happened.
crying.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that happened. When you started to do the research and found out what endo was, did you look back and say, oh my goodness, this is what I've been suffering from for so many years too? Because as soon as you read the symptoms, you're like, oh my goodness, my whole life, this is, you know, and you didn't get diagnosed until you're 45, right? You were 45 at this point.
Closer to 46.
Right. Okay. So you feel terrible. You start doing all this research. You find out all of this information. Oh my goodness, I've had this disease for so long. What happens next?
So I pretty much realized that excision is the way to go. And I'm pretty certain that I have to have more than a little one big endometrioma, another cyst, and like some microscopic. I knew that wasn't the case. I still was doubting myself. So I just went on to what is the Endometropolis?
Endometropolis.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on this, and my primary doctor was reaching out. Well, it so happened that he went to high school with a woman whose sister is an excision specialist in Milwaukee.
Small world.
This excision specialist in Milwaukee's office was right next to my very first gynecologist. And she knew my very first gynecologist, and she knew the second gynecologist I knew.
Wow. Small world.
So it came like full circle.
Right.
So I met with her, and all of a sudden it was just like, and I spent like, I had to wait like 3 or 4 months, but I spent all my time just on those, like researching everything. And in the meantime, I was giving my primary doctor, because he just loves to learn, like all the files that they had, like the medical.
Yeah. And for anyone who's listening or watching and you have no idea what we're talking about, if you're in the beginning of your
journey. Yeah, I meant to.
Yeah. No, that's okay. No, you said Facebook. There's 2 Facebook groups that are pretty large. One's called Nancy's Nook and the other one's called Endometropolis, that have a lot of information and data that you can go research about endometriosis that might not be as easy to find on the web. It's definitely not as easy to find on the web. It's everything. No. It's the correct information kind of in all in one spot. So both of those groups are fantastic to check out. So definitely, if you need help, that's a good place to start. So your doctor starts doing this research too, and
right,
and I find this excision doctor, right? So
yeah, it like all of a sudden, like, because she goes under the specialist of a fertility specialist, but she also started doing laparoscopic reversal of tubal ligation in 1990, like way ahead of time. She started doing hysterectomies vaginally and non-invasively. She got really in. She was like published, and he's like, oh my gosh. I called her up, and she does endometriosis, and like, so he's learning all this stuff, and I'm learning all this stuff. So I saw her, and even when during the exam, like it was back to like how my exam was done with my very first gynecologist. Right. Very thorough, like the rectovaginal exam, which for some reason, like I never had after him.
Yeah.
Where they can feel in between, and she's like, does this hurt? Does this hurt? I'm like, and I'm just laying there like barely moving. She's like, you've had a lot of practice hiding your pain, haven't you? She's like, you've got to tell me when it hurts. Don't breathe it out. So I was like, yeah, that hurts. Yeah, that hurts. Yeah, that hurts. Yeah, that hurts. Had a ultrasound done by like a specialist that was in her clinic. And they were like, has anyone said that your uterus is being like pulled downwards? They're like, there's probably adhesions pulling them downwards and everything like that. So the only issue I had was financial.
Yeah.
So I started a GoFundMe on Facebook, and that was really, really hard for me to do, like super hard, because how do you explain, and the women listening out here, excision is not covered by insurance.
That is correct.
Which is something that I will do in anything that I can, like, and help and advocate any way I can to change that.
There are some, I think there's some doctors and some groups. I know people that have gotten it covered.
I have too.
You've got to fight for, I think you got to fight your insurance company. So some offices will help you do that. But then, like you said, some doctors do not take insurance. And that was the case with my excision surgery too.
Right.
The hospital took my insurance, but the actual doctor I had to pay.
Mine did too.
Yeah.
So I started that, and I just remember like people being so gracious or whatever. And then I get this message from this woman that I've known since 4 years old. And she's like, all you have to do is find a provider under your insurance. And I was like, did you just, you're trying to explain that it's not covered. And I don't think people understand how something that is that severe cannot be covered.
Yeah.
So I still didn't get enough money to have the surgery. And, in the meantime, my doctor is putting me on pain management. So like Toradol, I think I had Toradol and during this year and a half before I finally had my surgery, in between the two surgeries, it's like I would go to the ER, they give me Toradol, which helped probably the most out of everything.
Toradol is amazing.
And I asked my doctor, I was like, can I please have Toradol? He's like, you can only take it for 3 days. I was like, are you kidding me?
I know.
I'm like, the one thing that helps me. So he put me on diclofenac, which is a prescription NSAID that is as similar to Toradol as you can get.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, and for anyone listening, Toradol is a non-narcotic pain reliever. It's like a high-powered Advil is what I like to call it.
Yeah,
and it is the most helpful. When I've had surgery, I've requested it. When I've had to go to the ER, I've requested it. And a tip for people who are listening, depending on where you are, there's these like IV clinics popping up all over the place.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can actually go there and they have nurses and doctors and you can request Toradol. Now, I don't know if it's in every country, in every state. We have some people that listen, but I have 2 here now in Michigan where I live.
Oh my gosh.
I don't go to the ER anymore unless I really think it's an emergency. If it's just really bad pain, I'll just go get an IV of Toradol.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I could have used that in that year and a half.
I know.
That's the other thing. It's like when you go into an ER and you say that you have endometriosis or pelvic pain, it's like Advil, ibuprofen, Aleve, Midol. I think I looked up Midol once and it's like the extra ingredient. No, Midol or Pamprin, the extra ingredient is caffeine. And I'm like, okay. Yeah.
So, which causes inflammation.
I'm like, I already drink coffee. So
it causes inflammation. I also want to say, just before, if you think you're having an emergency, don't go get it. Don't go to an IV center. I also want to be really clear about that. If you have acute pain, you should go to the ER because you may have a cyst or a cyst rupture, which is an emergency situation, or your appendix or something like that. I always just like to protect myself and keep myself,
absolutely
protected, because I am not a doctor. But those IV centers, like if I had really bad cramps, I have gone before.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And my regular primary nurse was great. She had a hysterectomy because she had severe fibroids. So she was really nice. And she actually a couple times gave me a shot of Toradol in the behind. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. Cause it's like, I probably went to the ER like 10, 12 times between surgeries.
Yeah. And think about that. You didn't go like your whole childhood into adulthood, into 20s, into 30s. And now you're going like so much. So you eventually get enough funds to have the excision surgery, and
Yep.
then I'm assuming you have an excision procedure.
Yeah. So finally got it done, and what was so great is she cut my fee in half.
Awesome.
Um, I think my doctor talked and he's like, because I was given hydrocodone from him as needed,
Yeah.
lidocaine patches, which did nothing, but they do something if you really have neck pain. I still have them, so they're great.
Yeah.
But TENS machine, everything. So so then I could get the surgery even earlier. So I finally got the surgery last February,
February
2019.
2019.
February 2019. So how old was I?
47.
Yes, right about a month before I turned 48.
Okay.
Wait, no. 40, oh, almost 47. Yeah, I
Okay.
was like a month
You're
before I turned
46.
almost 47. So
Okay.
she said it would be between like 2 and 5 hours. Oh, and the other thing we talked about was adenomyosis. She was almost certain I had it. I was kind of like, I don't have heavy bleeding. I don't have this. And she's like, just trust me. And so that was like scary for me, you know. I was like, I don't want to lose my other ovary. That's so important for women's health, for their bone health, for their heart health. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to lose the ovary. She's like, oh, I'd tell you if you're going to lose your ovary. She's like, if I thought it was a high chance, you would know. She's like,
Okay.
I will do everything to save your ovary. And I was like, I'd rather, after reading all the women's stories
Yeah.
before me, I was like, good age. If I lose my ovary, she's my trust into her. She says this is the best quality of care I can get, and I'm done.
Yeah.
So I was so excited. I went in for and how she does it, it's like you can't take any NSAIDs, of course, before surgery.
Yeah.
And she likes to do her surgeries within the first, like, about 10 days after your last period.
Okay.
So I remember the day of my last period was the last period I ever had in my life was January 24th, 2019. And what was so great about that was my grandmother and my mother did not go through menopause till age 62, 63.
Wow.
They were both in their early 60s. So the
Okay.
idea of me having a period.
Yeah. I understand.
Yeah.
I
Was
understand.
like, yeah. So I remember I was so calm. I had to do like the colon cleanse. And oh, that's the other thing. I would bleed every time I had my period when I had a bowel movement. And that was because I had a hemorrhoid. So there was an excuse for everything. So
Right.
I wanted to add that in. I thought of it because it's like I had to like do the go lightly, clean my bowels.
Yeah.
My excision surgeon, she is able to do like bowel resections. She is able to do work around the ureters and the kidneys. So she actually doesn't need extra surgeons, which a lot of people, if you're going to have surgeon with an excision surgeons, they're going to bring in a colorectal surgeon,
thoracic, urologist. And that's, as we're talking about that, that's always a really good question to ask if you're looking for questions to ask. Your excision specialist is, will you be bringing in additional doctors? Or are you skilled in these areas?
Right. And I asked her, I said, how many surgeries do you do? How long have you been doing surgeries? How many surgeries do you do per week? How many hysterectomies do you do? You have to ask the questions. And it's like she does surgery twice a week. So she says, I average anywhere between 5 and 6 surgeries a week. And I've been doing this since 1990 laparoscopically. Not necessarily excision. I think that started like the next year,
later
decade.
Yeah.
But she's like, and then I looked, she's published all this stuff, a member of the group, so I felt confident. So the morning, it was like, I don't know, it was like I was getting married kind of day, even though I wasn't. I was like, oh my God, it's the beginning of my new life. I was just like, and I remember getting to the hospital and I had no fear. I had fear before both of my other surgeries, and I literally was so low that I was like, if I don't wake up and something goes wrong, I don't care because I'm trying. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No,
I
for sure.
just,
You were just at the end of your rope of being in
mhm.
pain and not getting the answers that you needed. Okay, so how did the
So
surgery go?
great. So I woke up. I guess I was saying three things. I woke up again really early. I told the anesthesiologist by now, I'm like, I wake up really easily and I get really hyper. So they're wheeling me out of the operating table. And I'm like, do I have my ovary? Can I have applesauce? And where's my coffee?
Oh, that's so
The
funny.
other two surgeries, I had coffee right afterwards. Like I'm a total addict to coffee. So I was like, when I woke up, like the nurse was like, you've said that like 6 times. She's like, and you were saying that like as they were wheeling you out, they couldn't believe you were awake already. And I'm like, okay, I remember it this time. Do I have my ovary? Yes. Can I have applesauce? You have to wait a minute. Can I have coffee? You're really gonna have to wait a while. I'm like, okay. And so went into recovery, and my surgery was like 9 o'clock in the morning. Went into recovery. I by the time my surgeon came in, it turned out to be like a 6-hour surgery.
Did you end up
Um,
having, and then you ended up having a hysterectomy as well,
yeah,
that surgery. So she
yeah,
did excision and a
and
hysterectomy at the same time.
a vaginal hysterectomy. So still laparoscopic, like just four
Yep.
little holes,
Mhm.
nothing cut open. Which I mean, I think women just in general, if they have fibroids or whatever, it should be more advanced. They shouldn't have to be cut open for a
Yeah.
hysterectomy if it's for a different reason. So um she's telling me all this stuff and she's like, well, like you had, she calls it peritoneal resection. It's the same as excision, but that's the term she uses. She's like, well, it was all over your bladder. And I'm like, my bladder? Like I never had bladder issues. And she's like, it was all on the outside of your uterus. I'm like, outside of my uterus? She's like, you had an obliterated cul-de-sac or, pouch of Douglas, which, and like obliterated, she's like, that means it was just closed. It should be free and open. Rectovaginal, she's like, and then she shows me the picture. She's like, and then look at this. My colon was in a loop stuck to the bottom posterior of my uterus, pulling it down. It was almost like, I'm an artist. It was almost like glaze over
Mhm.
my colon in a loop. I don't even know how I went to the bathroom.
Wow. Wow.
And she
Wow.
said, I've been doing a lot of surgery. She's like, and yours was like really bad.
Yeah.
She's like, how you acted with the pain. She's like, I think you still hid the pain for me because I would have said it was going to be a longer surgery. I had no idea.
Right.
So I was just like, oh my gosh.
I bet you felt like you had almost a weight lifted off of you because you were vindicated at that point. Like all of those
And
years of suffering, and that other doctor who basically looked at you like all you wanted was pain medication.
mm-hmm,
I bet that was, did you just feel like a sense of
mm-hmm,
relief? Yeah.
mm-hmm. And right away, they're like, how do you feel? And I said, I motioned to my back. I'm like, I feel like I have no back. They're like, what do you mean? Because I'm high on anesthesia. I'm like, I have no back. I'm like, I don't notice that my back
The
is there.
pain.
So
Yeah.
I must have had pain all along and only noticed it like when it was acute.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
that was the first thing that I noticed right away. And I
Yeah.
felt, in terms of having that kind of surgery, I felt really good.
That's
And she
awesome.
actually sent me home that night
My
after
goodness.
6 hours. I mean, I only lived like 7 minutes away.
Yeah.
But she's like, I don't want you here. There's germs. I want you to go be comfortable, recover at home. And she said, well, this is good advice for anyone who has surgery. She says, in terms of the pain, you need to keep on top of it, which I think most people have known. She's like, but don't think about it like every hour because it's going to seem like forever. She's like, write down how your pain is every 12 hours and you will see
Mm-hmm.
that every 12 hours you're going to feel a little bit better.
It's good advice.
Um,
Really good advice.
And also, like, you know, when they say weight restrictions, she's like, that also includes walking dogs. You don't want a dog pulling you. I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that.
Yeah,
You think about
absolutely.
lifting weights, you just don't want the pulling. So
Yeah.
I just kind of hungered down and prepared. I like was not going to do anything. My whole thing was just going to like recover
Mm-hmm.
for at least 3 months. Like
Mm-hmm.
just
Good.
do the minimum of stuff. Like I was like, I
Good for
have
you.
suffered too long. I am
Yes.
not going to push myself.
Good for you.
And
Really
this
good.
is going to succeed.
Yeah.
So I did that. And
So
I'd
how
say
are you
by
feeling now?
completely
Now,
pain-free,
that's awesome. Right. So it's
I,
been a little over, it's been like a year and 4 months and you're completely
mhm.
pain-free.
I was completely pain-free by 4 months
Wow.
and completely fatigue-free, which
Wow.
was like, even because I asked her, I said, will my fatigue go away? She's like, I can't. That's the tough one. We still don't know enough about it.
Wow.
And I said, I can't take a nap. I
Right.
like,
Your energy is so much better. You just feel good, right? Every day.
yeah, I think the last time I felt fatigue free was probably when I was like 12,
Yeah.
because my fatigue started before my
Your
pain.
period.
And it was like, I remember this one time I was like, want to break the day. I'm going to lay down for like a half hour. Cause my naps were never a half hour. They were 4 or 5 hours long,
Yeah.
6 hours long. And I still woke up feeling tired. It was more like, I'll just sleep so I don't have to think about how tired I am, and I'll wake up and I'll still be tired. So all of a sudden I like laid down, and I'm like laying down and I can't sleep. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was an adjustment. I mean, a good adjustment,
Yeah.
but it
But
was like, I didn't know how to fill my days up with
right.
the energy that I
Right.
had.
So much more time.
I had so much more time. So I definitely went through like this period of anger,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
big time.
For sure.
Before I went into surgery, I thought the other fear was she's not going to find anything, because I
Yeah.
went through a period of being dismissed for so long
Yeah.
that maybe
Totally
she'll find
normal.
like one little speck and it's like, oh, it has been all in your head.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
had that fear. Um, and she's like, by 6 months this was like right after surgery. She's like, by 6 months, you will feel about as the best as you're going to feel. She's like, it's going to take a whole year to recover from this kind of surgery, but around 6 months, where you're at 6 months is the best. And so, 6 months passed and I was like, this is pretty darn good.
That's awesome.
And I don't recommend this, but I did this for me. I threw out my healthy eating out the window.
Oh,
Like
that was actually going to be one of my next questions is, have you changed anything else in your life, or you're just back to kind of just living without restriction?
well, okay, now I've cut out the sugar again, except for like once a week or something. And I started eating healthy, like starting in February, right before the pandemic. And I was like, shoot, the pandemic is when I want to, but I like treated myself. I started eating like cake, cookies, pastries,
Right.
cheese,
Gluten, right, dairy,
gluten,
everything.
everything. I mean, I
And
was
you
just
felt
like,
okay.
yeah. I
Wow.
mean, I didn't do it all at once. Like at
No,
first I was
right.
really like nervous,
Yeah.
but I'd like try one thing and I was like, I don't feel worse.
Right. No
Huh.
flare-ups.
Yeah, like I don't feel worse. And then it's like I also know that my ovary is working, because actually last week I was having some breast tenderness. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, my
Mm-hmm.
ovary is still working.
Right.
And the other thing that my doctor did, which was awesome, was he asked how to like test for perimenopause, because that I wanted to prove this. I took out all my anger on this gynecologist, and I wasn't even near perimenopause, even at age,
Right.
44. So,
Right.
but yeah, so I was like, okay, cool. My ovary's working. And like last week, I totally had sugar again. I was like, oh, I still have my PMS. That's fine. I don't care. Great. I
That's
have energy. It's like,
I'm
it's just,
so happy you found that doctor. What an inspiration, and just so hopeful for everyone who's listening that you can really have one excision surgery and feel so much better. And depending on how old you are, you may not need a hysterectomy, to feel
Right.
better. Exactly.
Right.
I think that just depends. And if you have adenomyosis, but
Yeah. And I did come back positive for adenomyosis, which I was
yeah,
surprised about because my periods weren't heavy, but she could tell by the way she was like,
the uterus
um,
was,
yeah. And
yeah,
like the tenderness but it's just like, you know, it's like, I'm so happy. And then there's that part of me still, and I'm working on it to let it go, that it's like, and I think I've done pretty well, but I'm so happy, but I'm so like, why did it take almost like 29 years to figure this out?
yeah,
Like almost 3 decades.
yeah, yeah. I'm so, so sorry that happened to you, but I'm so, so happy that you are feeling amazing.
Yeah. And I thought for sure I would have to do pelvic floor therapy.
Yeah.
And she has a pelvic floor therapist in her office, so I was kind of expecting to do that,
Yeah. But you didn't
and I
need to.
actually, yeah, and I don't think I need to, but I'm going to see her on Monday. It'll be like a little over a year checkup. It had to be canceled because of COVID, so
Yeah.
I'm excited to see her and to tell her how I'm doing.
That's so, so great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Really, honestly, so hopeful, so inspirational. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I'm just trying to think, like, yeah, I think just like for women or people who are still suffering, if a gynecologist dismisses you, just find another gynecologist. Another thing I did that year where it was like, okay, something's got to be done about this cyst, is I kind of stacked appointments with like a whole bunch of gynecologists, and because they're hard to get into, and
Yeah.
that's if you don't have a regular gynecologist, or if you're not happy with yours, just kind of look through and see if they deal with pain. And I've noticed that like certain gynecologists, you'll read their little bio or they'll have a video, and if they say like, I love delivering babies, it's like, that's great, don't go to that gynecologist because
Yeah.
she loves delivering babies or he loves delivering babies. Where I would go through and there'd be gynecologists where it's like, I love helping women who have fibroids and have deal with pain. I did have a consultation with that woman, and she was very honest with her. She's like, I mainly deal with fibroids. I don't deal with endometriosis, which was great. I totally appreciate someone who's just up and honest. So you kind of want to like vet them out a little bit and maybe
Yeah.
like make some appointments in a row.
Yep. I think that's great advice. It's really great advice.
Especially, and find a really good primary doctor. My primary doctor, bless his heart, he has diagnosed, he said, around 6 women with endometriosis since me. And
Because of you, you educated him. That's fantastic.
I keep my surgical pictures on my phone,
Yeah.
to have them out if someone's interested. Like I will tell men and women,
Yeah.
it's like men, it's like if you have daughters, look out for this.
Yeah.
If you have nieces,
Absolutely.
sisters,
Right.
anyone, like look for this.
This is
And
not normal.
I think when I remember when I broke my hand, it was just like I got so much sympathy. I was like, it's nothing, like, but and so I try to explain, like, I broke my hand, I had my gallbladder, and other people have broken things and have gallbladders, and so they're like, it's worse pain than that. I'm like, yes, it is.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
and just be really honest about your symptoms. Just really, like, I would get intimidated because the office visits have gotten pretty short from compared to when I first started with the
Yeah.
gynecologist. So it's like, have a bullet point. Like, I feel this sharp pain here during this month, during this time of month, I feel here. The fatigue starts here, tell them, describe the pain.
Yeah. And
Don't
track
just
it.
use the word cramps.
Yep. And track it and write down, is it burning? Is it shooting? Is it acute? Yeah, absolutely. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's fantastic, fantastic advice. Well, Ellen, thank you
Mm-hmm.
so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate you sharing this story with us.
Well, thank you for letting me blurt out my whole story. It's like, it's been, just kind of festering in me, my
Yeah.
whole years, so I hope I didn't take up too much time.
No, not at all. Not at all. This is really going to help a lot of people. And I really appreciate you being so brave to share all this.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for your podcast. It's wonderful. I've listened to all your episodes, and I think it's helping so many people out there.
Thank you. It really means a lot to me. It really does. I think sometimes I just, it's just what I do, but it's labor of love. It's a labor of love.
I found podcasts when I was kind of bedbound in that year and a half, and those helped me because sometimes I just couldn't open up my eyes.
Yeah.
And so I think, you having a podcast is another just wonderful tool to like get the message out. And I just think it's fantastic what you're doing, and you should be so proud of yourself.
Well, I couldn't do it without the brave stories and the warriors that come on and talk about it like you. So thank you so much, Ellen.
Oh, thank you.